What I'm saying is aging is caused because cells lose their packaging, and then eventually cells lose their identity. Disease ensues, cells check out, they become zombie-like, and then
senescence, right?
Senescence, and then our organs fail, and we die. But until recently, we had no idea why that was happening.
And so why is it happening?
Well, so the packaging's the really important part, because much like the software runs the code, the epigenome controls which genes are on and off. And if you stress the system, and by that I mean biological stress, and the biggest stress you can cause to a cell is to break its chromosome, because it's going to die if it doesn't fix it, or worse, for the body, you get a tumor. So the cell has to hunker down, stop dividing, arrest just about everything it's doing, and then try to repair that broken DNA. But in doing so, it has to do two things. First of all, it has to take proteins from somewhere else that are doing a good job keeping the cell from functioning, or making sure the cell's functioning correctly. And those proteins are used by the cell to repair the DNA that's broken. But also what's happening at the break is that that's all opening up as well, because you remember, if you break a DNA and it's spooled up, you can't fix it, you can't glue it back together unless you unpack it, stick it back together, and then you've got to repack it. So this movement of proteins and the unpacking, repacking of the DNA, I believe, leads to cells losing that original youthful, what we call a gene expression pattern of how the genes are turned on and off. And nerve cells, as they get older, lose their ability to stay nerve cells, and liver cells lose their identity as liver cells.
All right, so do proteins, the way that you're talking about them, sound like little creatures? I think of them, because of my background, like powder, like just sort of inert molecules, which clearly, judging by the way that you're talking about them, they're not. I've seen them animated before as having like articulatable shapes, and they actually move. Is that accurate?
Well, that's essentially it. It's super exciting when you realize that proteins aren't just blobs or powders in the cell. They're actually little machines, like Pac-Man, that go around and they can change the function of other things. They can package the DNA. And what they do is they create chemical reactions that normally would take 1 billion years to happen. This is what an enzyme does. It accelerates reactions. And so we've got about 20,000 different types of enzymes in the body, and they do different things. But what we've discovered over the last 20 years is there are certain types of enzymes that help package the DNA and help with the DNA repair. These are the ones that are doing the ping pong game. And without those, we're screwed. We basically will age more rapidly. Conversely, what's really exciting is we've discovered that you can make them more active to make sure the DNA is packaged correctly and the repair is very efficient. And there are ways you can do that: exercise, dieting, being hungry. They allow these enzymes that control our body and make us healthier. They make those enzymes much more active. So instead of a Pac-Man doing this, you exercise, you diet, take a molecule that we work on, and it'll go around and fix everything much more efficiently and keep you younger for longer, we think.
Why do you use the Pac-Man analogy, which makes me think of it's eating something? Is that what's happening? Is it eating cells that have a level of senescence, or is it more Bob the Builder, and it's going around tearing some things apart, putting some things back together?
Yeah, it's more like Bob the Builder, but I think a good example for at least the enzymes that we work on, called sirtuins, that protect the body, they're like a little tiny pair of scissors. They clip off chemicals called acetyls. And in doing so, when they clip off the acetyls off those packaging proteins, the DNA gets more compact. And that's called gene silencing. And over time, as we get older and through this DNA damage process, the sirtuins get inactive, they're distracted by DNA repair, and the packaging of that DNA, that hose spooling, starts to loosen. And now genes that have no business being on in the brain come on, and partly I believe that's why we have these diseases of the brain.
Fuck, that's so interesting. Okay, so one, I want to know from a lifestyle perspective, what are we doing that's speeding that up? And then two, what can we do from a lifestyle perspective to begin slowing that down or reversing it?
Well, so I've been studying these enzymes, the sirtuins. We have 7 in our bodies. I've been studying them for about 25 years. And what we've learned is that they respond to the cellular environment. There's a chemical that they require for gas. Think of them as the fuel, called NAD. And there's another molecule that is like the accelerator on the enzymes that makes them go even faster. And that's one of them is called resveratrol, which we discovered years ago from red wine. And together they actually do really great things on these enzymes and make them keep the body younger at least. For 25 years, we've been studying mostly animals and even little fungi, yeast cells. And what we've learned from those studies is that these are largely involved in responding to when organisms are under threat of survival. So how do you make the body feel like it's under threat? Adversity. So one is run a lot, or at least become out of breath. A few times a week, your body will say, "Oh man, we had to outpace one of those saber-toothed cats again." Got to build up the body. The other is to be hungry, either a couple of times a week or every day. Skip a meal or two, and then your body will turn on these sirtuins, make more of that fuel, NAD, for the enzymes, and we think that's what's in part responsible for the health benefits of those lifestyle choices.
All right, one thing though that you talk about that I found really interesting is this notion of what may be good for you when you're young may come back to bite you in the ass when you're older.
Yeah.
So it's like the whole notion of hormesis, that a little bit of bad is actually extraordinarily good, which is exactly what you're describing now. Get out of breath, do all this stuff. And so when the information started pouring out that the only thing across every known living organism that extends lifespan is to eat less, which you talk about in your own book, it feels like you're saying to do it for that reason. Just don't put as much stress on the system. But now I hear you saying, no, what you actually want to do is stress the system. Won't that stress of, I just ran from a lion, fuck, I'm starving, won't that begin to stack up and become problematic?
Well, actually, if you step on a snail, it's going to die. So there's certain amounts of stress that you don't want to do. But what you want to do is get the body to fear adversity and the future, but not enough to cause lasting damage or the unspooling of the DNA that'll lead to disease and eventually death. So you don't want to overdo it. You want to be a little bit puffed, you want to be a little bit hungry, but of course starvation, malnutrition is not going to make you live longer. So it's a fine line, and what we've learned from many animal studies and increasing numbers of clinical trials in humans is that you want to pulse it, let the body recover, not constant. We used to make animals go hungry all their lives, and it worked. But it actually works better if you let them recover, and I think that's the secret.
Then let's really dive into that. So I'm guessing you're talking about where animals were denied something like 20 to 30% of their caloric intake for very long periods of time, is extending their life by what, like 30% or something? So super interesting. But you're saying that if their caloric intake over a long period of time is roughly the same as an animal that's just allowed to eat until it's satiated, that if it's done in a pulse pattern of hunger and almost overfeed, they actually have the same benefits as the animal that has a chronic deficit of calories?
All right, well, let's be clear. Nobody knows what the perfect diet is, even when it comes to fasting. It's all largely based on rodent studies. So what I can tell you about the rodent studies, which I'm very familiar with, is that if you take a rodent and reduce its calories by 25% for its whole life, it will live longer, 30%, but it'll be really miserable and aggressive. And that's true for us as well. I've tried calorie restriction for about a week and I gave up. I was pretty angry. But what we discovered, my colleagues discovered, is that it's not just what you eat, it's when you eat that's important. And what's been found is that as long as you have that period of hunger in a mouse, so you can feed them every other day, then they can gorge themselves as much as they want. And they do. They eat about 90% of what a mouse having free access to food would eat. But they have the same longevity benefit as a mouse that's always been hungry. And if that's true, what that means is for us is that we can enjoy life as long as we have that period of hunger once a day or maybe twice a week. And I believe the only reason we age, we could live for 1,000 years otherwise. The only reason we age is that our repair systems become complacent. You mentioned that what is beneficial for you when you're young come back to bite you when you're old. What we think is that these repair systems are very good when we're young. So the idea is, it's called antagonistic pleiotropy, and I think it's right, and that is that we evolve to stay healthy and alive and fit till we're 40, and then the forces of natural selection decline after that because we've essentially bred, we've often had children, but we don't need to stick around beyond that, and building a body that will last 1,000 years is pointless at that, So most species only live as long as they need to reproduce, and then a little bit more. If you're a mouse that could die within 2 years, they only build a body that lasts 2 years. If you're a whale that has no predators, you can live for a couple of 100 years. That makes more sense.